Yes. So welcome to the analysis of the GS paper 3 for the perspective of UPSC mains examination. See, before starting with the class, let me first highlight as to what is the agenda of this particular class. In this particular class, I will be focusing on three distinct aspects. First and foremost, I will be carrying out an analysis of GS paper 3, specifically from the perspective of Indian economy, that is of this year's paper. Secondly, based upon the analysis of this year's paper, we will understand as to what are the key takeaways to prepare for the mains next year. Thirdly, I will be picking up one question which has been asked in this year's mains examination from the perspective of Indian economy. To that particular question, we will be discussing the answer in terms of introduction, body, and conclusion. So three things I will be doing in this particular session. First is the analysis of this year's paper. Then second one is based upon the analysis, what are the key takeaways? And then answer to the question which was asked in this year's mains examination. So let us start with the analysis of the GS paper 3 this year's. So as part of this analysis, what I will be doing is, first and foremost, we will look at the relative weightage of different subjects in the last 3 to 4 year mains examination GS paper 3. And we'll understand whether this pattern in terms of weightage to different subjects, has it continued in this year's mains examination or not? Secondly, if you look at your GS paper 3 syllabus in Indian economy, you have different themes such as agriculture, inclusive growth, budgeting and taxation, and so on. So we'll look into the weightage of different themes in the last 4 year mains examination and analyze whether the same trend has continued or not. So this will be part of the first part of our class. So here, as you can see, this is a chart which shows the relative weightage of different subjects in GS paper 3. So as you know, in GS paper 3, you have different subjects such as Indian economy, environment, science and technology, internal security, and disaster management. If you look at the Indian economy, in the last 4 year mains examination, that is from mains 2017 to mains 2020, on an average, almost around 100 to 110 marks have been asked from Indian economy. And the same trend has continued in UPSC mains 2021 as well. So as you can see, this time we had 100 marks from the Indian economy. So we had 4 10-marker questions and 4 15-marker questions. So 4 into 10, 40 plus 15 into 4, 60, 60 plus 40, that is 100 marks from the Indian economy. Secondly, if you look at the weightage of environment, on an average, around 30 to 40 marks have been asked from environment section in the last 4 year mains examination. And the same trend has continued for the mains 2021 as well. Similarly, the weightage of the other subjects, as you can see, that is science and technology, internal security, and disaster management, the same trend has continued for this year's mains examination. So as such, there has been no large surprises with respect to weightage of different subjects in GS paper 3 is concerned. Whatever weightage UPSC had earlier given to these subjects in the previous mains examination, the same weightage has continued in this year's mains examination as well. That is the first thing that you must understand from the perspective of GS paper 3. Second, see, if you look at the syllabus of the Indian economy mentioned in GS paper 3, the syllabus as such can be categorized into different pillars. For example, we have a pillar of agriculture, land reforms, food processing, and public distribution system. Second pillar happens to be inclusive growth. Third pillar is budgeting and taxation. Next is industrial policy, employment, and external sector. And then we have the infrastructure and investment. And if you see, in the previous 4 year mains examination, the theme which has been getting the maximum weightage happens to be the theme of agriculture, land reforms, food processing, and the public distribution system. On an average, almost like 50 to 60 marks have been asked from this particular theme. Even this year also, as you can see, this theme has got the maximum weightage, that is 50 marks. So as seen in the previous slide, this year we had 100 marks from the Indian economy in GS paper 3. And out of this 100 marks, almost 50% weightage, that is 50 marks, they have been asked from the theme of agriculture, land reforms, food processing, and public distribution system, which happens to be the most important theme in the Indian economy. The second most important theme is the theme of inclusive growth and banking and finance. On an average, 20 to 25 marks have been asked from this particular theme. The same trend has continued in this year mains examination as well. As far as the theme of industrial policy, employment, and external sector is concerned, as you can see in previous 2-year mains examination, that is in mains 2019 and mains 2020, not a single question was asked. And even this time also, no question was asked from this particular theme. But once again, I ask all the students to be more cautious when preparing for the Indian economy, because suddenly next year mains examination, we can expect at least like 15 to 20 marks from the theme of industrial policy, employment, and external sector. We cannot afford to ignore any themes. The best example which I can quote here can be seen with respect to the theme of infrastructure and investment. Can you see here that in mains 2018 and mains 2019, not a single question was asked from this particular theme. But suddenly in mains 2020, we had almost 30 marks asked from this theme of infrastructure and investment. So if you go blindly by saying that in last year's mains examination, question was not asked from industrial policy, so next year also question may not be expected, this will be a wrong interpretation. So you cannot afford to ignore any of the themes as far as the economy part is concerned. I hope this part is clear. Okay. So now let's have a look at the questions which have been asked in this year's mains examination from the Indian economy. As far as the other subjects are concerned, they will be handled by the concerned faculties. So here you have the questions from the Indian economy as in this year's mains examination. As you can see, we had almost 4 10-marker questions and 4 15-marker questions. Let us briefly touch upon these questions, try to identify as to why these questions were asked in this year's mains examination, and then we'll understand in the next part of the class as to what are the key takeaways. First and foremost, if you look at this question, the question is, explain the difference between the computing methodology of India's GDP, which has come into being after the year 2015. Now, why this question has been asked? See, there has been a raging debate in India that we may be overestimating our GDP. Former Chief Economic Advisor, Mr. Arvind Subramaniam, believes that we are probably overestimating our GDP. And such a concern has come into being, particularly after the change in the GDP methodology after the year 2015. In fact, one of the previous year's economic survey had a separate chapter dedicated to this aspect of whether India is overestimating its GDP or not. The economic survey had clearly highlighted that India as such is not overestimating its GDP. In fact, the GDP methodology which we have adopted right now, it is in line with the international benchmarks or the international standards. So India is not overestimating as such. But here, if you look at the question which UPSC had asked, UPSC did not ask a direct question related to the controversy over the GDP estimation which was in news. Question was not directly asked from the current affairs. Question was asked with respect to core part of your UPSC syllabus, that is estimation of GDP. So if a particular student had read this particular topic only from the perspective of current affairs, and if a student had not gone into the core part of syllabus, that is about the estimation of GDP, such a student would not have attempted this particular question. I hope you're getting this point. Okay. Secondly, The second question was distinguish between capital budget and revenue budget. Explain the components of both of these accounts. As far as this particular topic is concerned, this is more of a prelims topic. So when we prepare for the prelims, right? So we discuss about the components of the revenue account, the components of the capital account. So more likely to be asked in the prelims examination. But once again, this question was asked in the mains examination. Why? Because in the UPSC syllabus, you have a separate topic of government budgeting. So from this particular topic of government budgeting, a very core part, a static part of the syllabus has been asked. So whenever you are reading a syllabus, so say the syllabus is government budgeting, not only should you understand about the current affairs related aspects of government budgeting, you must also understand about the core part. Now, for example, when you are reading the economic survey, just understanding the economic survey or the announcement of the economic survey, or for that matter, budget alone is not sufficient. You must also correlate these aspects to the core part of the syllabus. The next question was with respect to what extent the land reforms have been able to improve the socio-economic conditions of the small and marginal farmers in India. This question directly asks from your syllabus. So in your syllabus, you have a topic of land reforms. So directly from this particular syllabus, they have asked this question as to what extent the land reforms have been able to improve the socio-economic conditions. The next question, how and to what extent would micro irrigation help in solving India's water crisis? This question was asked because of two reasons. One, it is directly related to the syllabus. So in your syllabus, you have a topic of types of irrigation systems. So one of the irrigation system happens to be the micro irrigation. So directly from the syllabus. Apart from that, according to a recent report published by Niti Aayog, known as Composite Water Management Index report, India is presently staring at its worst water crisis in its history. So it has a connotation of even the current affairs as well, because as you can see, it is explicitly saying to what extent the micro irrigation will help us solve the present water crisis. As far as the 50 marker questions is concerned, the first 50 marker question was with respect to whether the Indian economy is facing a V-shaped economic recovery. Why this question was asked? Now we all know that the last financial year, the Indian economy registered a negative GDP growth rate of minus 7.5%. The Indian economy registered its lowest GDP growth rate, in fact, a negative GDP growth rate for the first time since 1979-1980. That is for the first time in the last 41 years. So because of the economic slowdown, this question was asked as to whether Indian economy is having a V-shaped economic recovery. So this topic of V-shaped economic recovery was a recurrent theme in the newspapers. So this question as such, even though not explicitly mentioned in your syllabus, but a question has been directly picked up from the current affairs. Next one, investment in infrastructure is critical to pursue high GDP growth rate and have inclusive growth. Two reasons as to why this question was asked. First and foremost, in your syllabus, you have a separate topic of infrastructure. Secondly, as you know, the government has been giving a lot of push to the creation of infrastructure in India. The government has launched a number of initiatives such as the National Infrastructure Pipeline, Development Bank in the form of National Bank for Financing Infrastructure Development, Gati Shakti Master Plan, National Monetization Pipeline, and so on. So it is behind these backdrop. This question was asked as to how infrastructure sector will help us promote high GDP growth rate and inclusive economic growth. The next question, what are the salient features of the National Food Security Act and to what extent this act has been helping us in eliminating hunger and malnutrition? Once again, this question directly from the core part of your syllabus. So in the syllabus, you have a topic of public distribution system, its objectives, functioning, limitations, and reforms. So from that particular topic, this question has been asked. Nextly, you have this topic from the Indian agriculture. The question is, what are the present challenges before the crop diversification? How do the emerging technologies provide an opportunity for the crop diversification? So in the GS paper 3 syllabus, if you have a look at the topic, there is a topic mentioned as crop diversification or cropping pattern in India. So directly from this particular topic of cropping pattern in India, we had got this particular question. So this is a general idea as far as the questions asked from the Indian economy is concerned. I'm not going into the details of each and every question. So we will be coming up with a separate analysis of the answers to these questions later on. As far as this particular class is concerned, in this class, I will be discussing the answer to the question with respect to investment in infrastructure. Okay. So based upon the analysis of this year's mains question paper, what are the key takeaways? That is, how should you prepare for the next year mains examination by looking at this year's mains examination? Let's understand that part. See here, first and foremost, one thing you must understand here is, we have seen that the relative weightage of different subjects in GS paper 3 that has consistently remained same in the last 5 years mains examination. There has been no surprises with respect to relative weightage of different subjects. So we can largely expect that the weightage of different subjects in GS paper 3 is set to continue. So as far as Indian economy is concerned, we can easily expect almost around 100 to 110 marks from the Indian economy. This is the first key takeaway. The second key takeaway here is, within the Indian economy, we have seen that there are different themes like agriculture and allied sector, inclusive growth, budgeting and taxation, external sector, and so on. The relative weightage of these different themes in the Indian economy, it has almost remained same. So the same pattern or the same trend as such may continue going forward. And we have seen the two most important themes from the Indian economy are agriculture and allied sector and inclusive growth. So when you are approaching Indian economy, you must give more amount of emphasis on these two themes of agriculture and inclusive growth. But it does not mean that you can afford to ignore other themes. Other themes would also have to be studied, but more importance, more time, more efforts for the theme of agriculture and inclusive growth. I hope this part is clear. Next. Now we have seen these questions asked in this year's mains examination. Now, based upon the analysis of these questions, broadly, I can categorize these questions into 3 different types. First type of questions are those questions which are directly asked from the syllabus mentioned in GS paper 3. So we have questions such as land reforms, types of irrigation systems with respect to PDS. So directly from the syllabus in GS paper 3. Second type of questions are the current affairs related questions. The best example happens to be the V-shaped economic recovery. So it is not explicitly mentioned in a syllabus, but it was in news. Since it was in news, since it was a recurrent theme, UPSC had asked this question. Third type of questions are those questions which may not be explicitly mentioned in a syllabus or may not be directly asked from the current affairs. But these questions are asked from the theme of the current affairs itself. That means that they are motivated from the current affairs. When I say motivated from the current affairs means instead of asking a question directly from the current affairs, UPSC has asked a question related to the core part of the current affairs. I hope you're getting this point. Now, for the best example happens to be this. Explain the difference between the computing methodology of India's GDP. UPSC did not ask us a question about what is a controversy over the GDP estimation. Rather, UPSC asked a question related to the core part of his syllabus, right? So broadly, we have 3 types of questions. So how should you prepare for these type of questions? coming to the first type of questions, that is the questions which are directly asked from the core part of his syllabus, that is the syllabus mentioned in GS paper 3. See, when UPSC mentions the syllabus, UPSC mentions only the broad dimensions. UPSC never mentions the micro dimensions of the syllabus. Now, for example, UPSC would just mention the cropping pattern in India. It will not mention the micro dimensions of cropping pattern. Similarly, if UPSC is mentioning types of irrigation systems, it will just mention this irrigation system, but it will not mention the micro dimensions. So what you have to do here is, to prepare for such topics, you have to look at the syllabus and then visualize as to in which all dimensions question can be asked. And you have to prepare for all of these dimensions by adopting a 360-degree approach. Now, for example, you have this topic of land reforms in India mentioned in UPSC syllabus. Now you have to visualize or think on in what dimensions question can be asked with respect to land reforms. Now, questions can be expected with respect to what kind of land reforms we have introduced. What are the components of land reforms? Why the land reforms have been introduced? To what extent the land reforms have been successful? What are the challenges in implementing the land reforms? And what should be done going ahead? So if you prepare for these 4 to 5 dimensions related to land reforms, you would be in a position to write any question asked in the UPSC mains examination related to land reforms. I hope you're getting this point, right? Similarly, when you look at this topic of micro irrigation, what normally students do is they focus only upon the benefits of micro irrigation as to how micro irrigation will help us, but they don't go into the other dimensions of micro irrigation. The other dimensions of micro irrigation which becomes important are what are the challenges in promoting micro irrigation in India? How to address these challenges? Unless you don't know the challenges, unless you don't know the strategies, you'll not be able to do a full justification to this answer. I hope you're getting this point, right? So look at the GS paper 3 syllabus. Think of the dimensions on which questions can be asked and prepare for those dimensions by adopting a 360-degree approach. In that particular case, you will not miss out on any question which are asked directly from the syllabus mentioned in GS paper 3. I hope this part is clear, all of you. Secondly, as I said, the second type of questions are the questions directly asked from current affairs. So keep yourself updating with the current affairs. So keep on reading newspapers. So whenever you come across any current affairs related article related to Indian economy, so analyze that particular article more thoroughly. Only then you'll be able to write good answers in the UPSC mains examination. Thirdly, as I said, there are some questions which are directly motivated from the current affairs. So in order to prepare for these topics, what you must do is, whenever you come across any current affairs related topic, just don't focus only on the current affairs. Link the current affairs to the core part of your syllabus. That is the best way to prepare for the UPSC mains examination. Now, for example, remember in the last current affairs class, I discussed about the PepsiCo controversy, right? I discussed about the PepsiCo controversy wherein recently the Protection of Plant Varieties and Farmers Authority, it has decided to revoke the registration of potato variety, which was earlier given to PepsiCo. Now, what students will do is they'll just focus on the current affairs related part about the PepsiCo controversy. But if you don't understand about the act itself, that is Protection of Plant Varieties and Farmers Rights Act, you'll not be able to do a justice to the answer. Moreover, UPSC, it can frame a question based upon the current affairs. For example, you can expect a question directly related to what are the provisions of the Protection of Plant Varieties and Farmers Rights Act, to what extent it has benefited the farmers. I hope you're getting this point. So when you come across a current affairs related topic, just don't focus on the current affairs, but understand the background also. That is also equally important. I hope you got to know this point, right? So this is how you have to approach different types of questions in the UPSC mains examination. Apart from that, having knowledge alone is not sufficient enough. You should have an ability to express that knowledge onto words. So you should do a regular answer writing practice. And when you're writing answers, ensure that you're writing answers within the stipulated time period. So if it is a 10 marker question, ideally you should write an answer in 7 minutes. And if it is a 15 marker question, ideally you should write an answer in 11 minutes. So whenever you're writing answer, ensure that you are writing answers within the stipulated time period. Apart from that, keep on doing a value addition or enrichment to your answers. That is also equally important. I hope we are clear now. So far what we have done is, first and foremost, we have discussed the GS paper 3. Secondly, we have understood as to what are the key takeaways as to how should we prepare for the next year mains examination. Now I'm going into the discussion of a particular question asked in this year mains examination. The question here is, investment in infrastructure is essential for more rapid and inclusive economic growth. Discuss in the light of India's experience. Now, before discussing the answer to this particular question, let me first highlight as to what kind of approach can you adopt for the answer writing. Now, probably the approach which I'm going to discuss here, this approach you could incorporate in writing answer in the GS paper 3 Indian economy. So this approach would be a general approach which you can adopt for any question. So what is this approach all about? I have repeatedly discussed this approach in the current affairs classes. So let me re-emphasize the same aspect once again. See, whenever you come across a question in the UPSC mains examination, first thing is identify the central theme. That's very important. Identify the central theme first. After identify the central theme, think of the different dimensions which you know with respect to the central theme. That's the second part. So there could be some 4 to 5 different dimensions which you know with respect to a central theme. Third aspect, read the question once again, and out of those 4 to 5 dimensions, identify as to which dimension is your primary dimension. The primary dimension will directly become the body of your answer. The other dimensions will become either your introduction or the conclusion, or they can be used to enrich your answers. And fourth one is, while writing an answer, always remember this keyword. So to enrich your answer, to get an edge over your competitors, to get that additional push of 1 to 1.5 marks, you can remember this keyword, budget. That is, take support of budget. If at all there is any relevance of the question, take highlight of important case studies, highlight important committee reports, diagrams, incorporate diagrams, take examples from the economic survey, and always incorporate facts and figures in your answers. So if you adopt this 4-step approach, you will be able to write wonderful answers in the Indian economy GS paper 3. Now, for example, let me apply this 4-step approach to one question. Let's say the question here is, public-private partnership in Indian Railways is a step in the right direction. However, it faces multifaceted challenges. Discuss. I hope you got the question, right? So let's try to adopt this 4-step approach here. The central theme of this question is public-private partnership in railways. This is my central theme. Already in current affairs classes, you have got to know the different dimensions of PPP in railways, right? For example, we have already discussed the need for PPP in railways. We have discussed the benefits of PPP in railways. We have discussed the challenges part. And we have also discussed as to how to address these challenges. In particular, I hope you are able to recall, we have discussed the recommendations of Bibek, Debroy Committee on Railway Modernization. Now go back to the question here. What does the question say? Question says that public-private partnership in Indian Railways is a step in the right direction. However, it faces multifaceted challenges. So what is the primary dimension? The primary dimension here is the challenges, right? So the challenges here will be the body of the answer. I hope you're getting this point, right? But there is a statement in the question. The statement is that public-private partnership in the Indian Railways is a step in the right direction. So you have to substantiate the statement in the introduction. And the best introduction here can be with respect to need for PPP in railways. This itself will become your introduction, right? Once you write the introduction, can I say that these benefits as such, it can be incorporated as a diagram, that is an hub and spoke diagram. So benefits of PPP and then different arrows. So by incorporating these two things, that is need and benefits, you are substantiating a statement given in the question that adoption of PPP in railways is a step in the right direction. And then you are discussing the challenges. So once you discuss 5 to 6 challenges, in the conclusion, you'll have to highlight 2 to 3 strategies by taking help of Vivek Debroy. I hope you're getting the flow here, right? So don't you think here there is an organic linkage between one dimension to the next dimension? We are starting with the need for PPP, then you are highlighting the benefits, then you are discussing the challenges, and then the strategies. So there is a logical flow. This flow is extremely important while writing the answers in the mains examination. I hope you are clear now. So all of you are ready now to write the answer to this question, right? Okay. So take 2 minutes of your time. Tell me the central theme here. What's the central theme? Let me know in the chat box. What is my central theme to this particular question? Good, good, Abhishek. Others? I'm waiting for the response from others. What is the central theme in this particular question? Infrastructure investment, good, Shweta. Good, good, Nidhi. Okay. Now, here if you read the question here, it says investment in infrastructure is essential for what? For pursuing high GDP growth rate and to promote inclusive economic growth. So central theme here happens to be the infrastructure, right? So this is my central theme. Now with respect to this central theme, can you tell me 2 to 3 dimensions? What can be the 2 to 3 dimensions here? Need, benefits, constraints, challenges. Good, good, Muskan. Need and benefits. Good, Nidhi. Okay. Here, if you see with respect to infrastructure, one theme directly, one dimension is need and benefits, right? Second dimension could be with respect to various initiatives taken by the government for creation of infrastructure, right? Various initiatives. Third dimension could be with respect to challenges, right? Fourth dimension could be with respect to strategies in order to optimally leverage infrastructure sector, right? So there are different dimensions, right? Now, read the question carefully here. It says investment in infrastructure is essential for rapid and inclusive economic growth. Discuss in light of India's experience. Now, what is my primary dimension? What is my primary dimension? See, one primary dimension is obviously this, need and benefits. But is it the only dimension? Is it the only dimension? No, because it says that we have to discuss in the light of India's experience. To what extent India has been able to leverage infrastructure sector to promote inclusive growth and development. So this aspect should also be included in your answer, that is to challenges. So to what extent India has been able to use infrastructure to promote inclusive growth and development. So while writing the answer, one part of the body of the answer, this would be on benefits of investment in infrastructure. Once you highlight the benefits, in the second part of the body of the answer, you can highlight about the challenges. The other dimensions can be your introduction and the conclusion. I hope we are clear now. with respect to structuring part. So let's discuss the content to the answer. So once I discuss the content to the answer, then I will discuss the model answer or the suggested answer to this particular question. Clear? So here, I hope you are able to see the screen now, all of you. Yes. So these are the three distinct dimensions: need, challenges, and initiatives. First and foremost, see, when we say infrastructure, you must realize is not just physical infrastructure such as roads, railways, ports, airports, and so on. Infrastructure also includes social infrastructure, that is schools, hospitals, housing, sanitation, electricity. It also includes the digital infrastructure such as telephone connection, mobile phone connection, broadband connection, and so on. If you interpret this question as only the physical infrastructure, you will not be able to do justice to the answer. Because if you have to highlight as to how infrastructure sector is going to promote inclusive growth, what will come there? Social and digital infrastructure. So the way you interpret infrastructure is extremely important. So always have this multi-dimensional perspective, right? So now coming to the need for infrastructure. See, first and foremost, we all know that the Indian economy has been facing the economic slowdown. The GDP growth rate last year was minus 7.5%. And it is being believed that if you make more of investment in infrastructure, we would be able to give a fillip to both consumption expenditure as well as investment expenditure, both of which are considered to be the major drivers of Indian economy. So if the government is spending more money on creation of infrastructure, automatically demand for iron, steel, cement, electricity will increase, demand expenditure will increase. At the same time, we will be able to crowd in the private sector investment, right? So if you look at infrastructure as such, different countries across the world, they have used infrastructure as a weapon, as a brahmastra, to come out of poverty and underdevelopment. Countries such as US came out of the Great Economic Depression by investment in infrastructure. Japan, whose economy was devastated after the Second World War, was able to pursue high GDP growth rate because of investment in infrastructure. In recent times, China has been able to pursue that high GDP growth rate because of this investment in infrastructure. I hope you're getting this point, right? Apart from that, according to RBI, the investment in infrastructure has a local multiplier effect of 2.45. Remember, we had discussed this in the current affairs class, right? So for every 1 rupee that we spend on creating infrastructure, we get an output of 2.45. So local multiplier effect will pitch in. So that is why it is being said that creation of infrastructure will help us realize the vision of $5 trillion economy. Secondly, see, presently, if you see, India is facing jobless growth. The employment elasticity in case of India is hardly 0.1, which means 1% increase in GDP growth rate leads to increase in employment creation by only 0.1%, right? The sector which has a potential to create more of jobs is a manufacturing sector. But the problem is the share of the manufacturing sector in terms of GDP as well as in terms of contribution to employment, this has remained stagnant since 1991 economic reforms. Even today, the manufacturing sector contributes only around 17% to India's GDP, and it contributes only around 12% to India's employment. So manufacturing sector is not something which we can rely as of now to create jobs. The savior for us right now can be the infrastructure sector. Next, infrastructure sector can also help us promote inclusive growth and development. For example, according to the Committee on Doubling Farmers' Income, creation of infrastructure such as roads, railways, and rural infrastructure, so on, it will help us reduce the input cost. It will help us enhance the productivity and enable the farmers to get higher prices. The best example happens to be here, ENAM. So what is ENAM? ENAM is nothing but a digital infrastructure, right? So this ENAM in turn enables the farmers to sell their agriculture produce anywhere throughout India and get fair and remunerative prices on their agricultural produce. So this can be a tool for doubling farmers' income. Similarly, creation of infrastructure such as collection centers, godown, cold chain infrastructure, etc., will help us reduce the post-harvest losses and enable the farmers to gain more income, right? Similarly, the infrastructure sector can provide the multimodal connectivity to the MSME clusters, and it will help us give a fillip to the MSME sector. Now, the MSME sector is quite important because the MSME sector as such contributes almost around 28% to India's GDP and 45% to the manufacturing output in India. This is the significance of the manufacturing sector. But the MSMEs as such, they face problems with respect to lack of access to the raw materials or the marketing because the infrastructure is not so well developed. So by creating infrastructure, we would be able to boost entrepreneurship, especially at the grassroots level, and promote inclusive growth and development. Similarly, creation of infrastructure will help us to improve the school outcomes, the educational outcomes, improve the health outcomes, bring about transformation of rural India, and so on. Now, for example, according to a study carried out by World Bank, 10% increase in broadband penetration in rural India will help us increase our GDP by 1%. So 10% increase in broadband penetration increases GDP by 1%. So once again, a direct correlation between digital infrastructure and higher GDP growth rate. Apart from that, if you see the logistic cost in case of India, it is much higher at almost around 12 to 14% of India's GDP. So because of the higher logistic cost, the manufacturing competitiveness of India has been quite lower. Export competitiveness is quite lower. So by creating infrastructure, by promoting multimodal connectivity to SEZs, manufacturing clusters, etc., we can reduce the logistic cost to the international benchmark of 8 to 10% of the GDP. It can help us promote manufacturing competitiveness. It can promote Make in India, Assemble in India, enable India to promote export-led model, and more importantly, help us lay down a strong foundation for Atmanirbhar Bharat, self-sufficient India. And lastly, it will also help us create disaster-resilient infrastructure. That is, infrastructure which can withstand the impact of disasters which India is now frequently facing. Clear? So these are the benefits. Now, as far as the challenges is concerned, first and foremost, most of you know that there is large-scale delay and cost overruns when we are implementing the infrastructure projects. For example, as discussed in the current affairs class, according to a recent report published by the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation, 1 in every 5 projects get delayed for more than 5 years. So if you launch 5 projects now, this year, out of these 5 projects, 1 project would get delayed for more than 5 years. And whenever there is a delay, there is cost escalation. And this report has highlighted that the cost escalation is as high as around 4.3 lakh crores in the year 2019-20. So we have not been able to efficiently implement the infrastructure projects on time. Similarly, there is lack of coordination between multiple ministries and departments. We have problem of financing. So infrastructure projects require long-term financing, and there's a lot of risk involved in giving financing for the infrastructure projects because the infrastructure projects may get delayed. So whenever banks, whenever NBFCs have given loans to infrastructure projects, it has normally led to asset liability mismatch. The best example happens to be the IL and FS crisis. I hope you must have heard about this NBFC crisis, right? So this IL and FS crisis was predominantly because of this asset liability mismatch. Similarly, the capital market in case of India is underdeveloped. And lastly, right now we are relying on public-private partnership for the creation of infrastructure. But the problem here is the PPP as such is facing a number of constraints and challenges as identified by Vijay Kelkar committee. So that is why the government has launched a number of initiatives in order to leverage infrastructure as a tool to pursue high GDP growth rate and inclusive growth. For example, we have launched National Infrastructure Pipeline, which seeks to spend 111 lakh crores for the next 5 years for the creation of world-class infrastructure. We have launched a development bank in the form of National Bank for Financing Infrastructure Development. We have launched National Monetization Pipeline and Gati Shakti Master Plan. So these are the initiatives, right? So this is a content for the answer. Now, based upon the content of the answer, let us now discuss as to how can you write an answer to this question. So here, if you look at a suggested answer structure, in the introduction, as I said, you need to substantiate the statement given in the question. That is, you have to prove that investment in infrastructure can help us promote high GDP growth rate and inclusive economic growth. This you have to prove in the introduction. And then in the body, there can be 2 dimensions, that is need and benefit of infrastructure, in particularly how infrastructure sector will help us promote high GDP growth rate and inclusive growth. And then to what extent India has been able to leverage infrastructure as a tool. And then in the conclusion, a way forward or some strategies. That's it. So let's look at the suggested answer to this question. Look at the introduction here. The introduction here is infrastructure sector is a key determinant of economic growth and development of a country. Countries across the world have used infrastructure as a weapon, as a Brahmastra, to escape from vicious cycle of poverty and underdevelopment. If you want to come out of poverty, if you want to come out of underdevelopment, infrastructure is a weapon. So can you see here in the introduction, you are substantiated that once we make investment in infrastructure, automatically it can act as a tool to promote high GDP growth rate. After the introduction, this flowchart or this diagram can be incorporated. So in this diagram, what you are making it evident to the examiner is when we say infrastructure, infrastructure does not only mean physical infrastructure. Infrastructure also means social infrastructure. Infrastructure also means digital infrastructure. So you are interpreting the infrastructure as a multidimensional perspective. Secondly, you could incorporate this flowchart here, mind map, which is explaining the virtuous economic cycle between infrastructure and inclusive economic growth. So once we make more of investment in infrastructure, we would be able to provide higher connectivity, provide access to basic services, job opportunities, and hence promote inclusive growth and development. So this is a kind of self-explanatory diagram which you are incorporating the answer in order to do a kind of enrichment, value addition, right? Next, in the body of the answer, as I said, in the first part of the body of the answer, you must highlight as to how infrastructure sector will help us promote high GDP growth rate and inclusive growth. So you have at least around 4 to 5 points. But writing the points alone is not sufficient because your points will be very generic in nature. What you have to do is you have to substantiate these points through answer enrichment, value addition. Remember the value addition points which I told you: budget, case studies, committee reports, diagrams. Those things you have to incorporate here. For example, I have highlighted here the capital expenditure multiplier. Then here I have highlighted about ENAM. Probably you can incorporate even Dalwai panel also here if you want to. Then logistic cost, then broadband penetration as highlighted by World Bank, right? So this is the first part of the body of the answer. In the second part of the body of the answer, here, as you can see, despite these benefits, India has failed to optimally leverage infrastructure sector. Why? So you have 2 to 3 problems as I discussed, and then look at the conclusion part. Please have a look at the conclusion. Conclusion here, what I've done is I have linked the infrastructure sector directly to Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs. In particular, you have SDG 9. SDG 9 focuses on creation of infrastructure to promote sustainable development goals. So directly in my conclusion, I have highlighted that infrastructure lies at India's ability to realize number of sustainable development goals. So going forward, whatever initiatives which we have launched, they need to be efficiently implemented to lay down a strong foundation of Atmanirbhar Bharat. Now, if you look at the number of words which I have used here to write the answer, it is approximately around 280 words. So in 280 words, I have tried to highlight the different dimensions of the question. Are you clear with this, all of you? Now the question is, how do you prepare for these topics? So to help you prepare for these topics, obviously we have a number of sources. The first and the most important source obviously is your mains compass. So if you go to a mains compass, in the mains compass, all of these things have already been incorporated. Apart from mains compass, you would also have the revision classes, the mains revision classes, which we will be conducting just before the mains examination. So in these revision classes, we will be covering the entire length and breadth of the entire syllabus, both from the core part as well as the current affairs related part. Now, for example, as far as this topic of infrastructure is concerned, not only have I discussed this topic in your current affairs classes, apart from that, I've also revised this particular topic for the students who are appearing for this year mains examination. As you can see, this is a screenshot from the revision classes which I had conducted before the mains examination. And in this particular revision class, I had discussed about how creation of infrastructure will help us bring multifaceted benefits like economic $5 trillion economy, creation of employment opportunities, logistic costs, and so on. Then I had discussed about the challenges with respect to the infrastructure sector. And after the end of the discussion, I had summarized the entire discussion in the form of a mind map. So in this particular slide as such, I had incorporated as to why should India focus on infrastructure, what initiatives which we have taken, and what are the challenges or the problems. So everything which you need to know with respect to infrastructure was put in one particular slide for the sake of revision. So if someone had revised this slide alone, such a student would have written a very good answer to the question which we had discussed just now. Clear? Apart from that, whenever we conduct the revision classes in the mains, we also take up some questions for the practice. And after discussing this topic of infrastructure, the question for practice which I had taken up was discuss with suitable illustrations as to how creation of infrastructure would lead to inclusive growth and development. So as you can see, the question which was asked in this year mains examination was almost on the similar lines. Like to what extent infrastructure would help us promote inclusive growth and development. In fact, the suggested answer which I had given in the class, look at the introduction here. The same introduction I have incorporated in the answer to the question which was asked in this year's mains examination. The introduction is same here. Infrastructure sector is a key determinant of economic growth and development. Countries across the world have used infrastructure as a weapon to escape from vicious cycle of poverty and underdevelopment. In fact, this diagram also is being incorporated in this year's examination, right? So apart from this question, which I discuss in much greater detail, there are other questions also which can be answered from our different sources. So here in this particular table, as you can see, I've highlighted the questions asked in this year's mains examination and from which source you could have answered this particular question. As of now, I'm not going to the details of these questions one by one. So as I discussed at the start of the session, we will be coming out with a separate analysis of these questions one by one. So whatever answer I discussed with respect to the creation of infrastructure, in same way, we will be discussing the answers to these questions one by one. I hope you're clear now. Okay. So this is it as far as the Indian Economy GS paper 3 is concerned. So whatever doubts you have, you can hold on to your doubts. We'll come back to your doubts at the end of the session. Now Vaibhav sir will come and he will start with a discussion of the questions from the environment and biodiversity. Okay.
Am I visible and audible to everyone? Abhishek? All right. Okay, so beginning with the discussion on environment section of GS paper 3, we already know that there are 2 lines to the syllabus. Of course, these 2 lines do not give you the full extent of the actual number of the question and the weightage which is allocated to this part of the syllabus. Because when you look into the number of the questions and when you look into the overall marks dedicated to these questions from the environment section, they are 5. So the total number of 5 questions were asked out of the total 20 questions. And if you look into the marks, there were 3 10 markers and there were 2 15 markers, taking the total to 60 marks. So you can understand that although it might look like a 2-pointer, 2-line syllabus given to overall environment section, but when it comes to the actual number of questions which are being asked from this section, it is actually 5. So there were total 5 questions, and let me first give you a brief idea as to why they were asked. Starting with the first question, which was about, so there were 2 questions on the most important highlight of this particular year when it comes to the climate change, right? We all of us know that there was COP26, or the Conference of the Parties to the UNFCCC 26, was organized in the month of November, which continued until December in at Glasgow. And so the first question from the environment section talked about the purpose of Green Grid Initiative. One sun, one world, one grid. All of those who have gone through mains QIP classes or current affairs classes know that this topic has been extensively discussed at both these locations. So the first question was, explain the purpose of OSOWOG launched at the World Leaders Summit of COP26. When was this first idea floated in the International Solar Alliance? Pretty straightforward question. The second question was, describe the key points of the revised global air quality guideline recently released by World Health Organization. How are these different from its last update in 2005? What changes in India's National Clean Air Program are required to achieve this revised standard? So in the month of September, all of us know that WHO came after new set of guidelines after a period of 15 years. So the last time when the WHO came up with such an guideline and standards when it comes to air pollution was in 2005. And since then, WHO did not come up with any set of updated standards, because a lot of research has gone into these air pollutions and what are the various sources of air pollutions, what are the important pollutants. For example, when last time it was released, the particulate matters were not given such a great importance. And now in 2021, after the period of 15-16 years, WHO came up with new updated guidelines. And so the question was very much expected. Question number 8 was about earthquakes. Now, this is the only question we can say out of all the 5 questions which does not have any anchor in the current affairs. There was no major earthquake either in 2020 or 2021. But we know since disaster is a part of the syllabus, so this does not have any kind of current anchor. But the question was pretty straightforward. Discuss about the vulnerability of India to earthquake-related hazards. Give examples, including the salient features of major disaster caused by earthquake in different parts of India during the last 3 decades. If you look into the NCRT's chapter, if you look into the Compass magazine, you will look into Focus magazine, you will find the answers to these questions. The question number 17, again on COP26 UNFCCC, and this time asking about the major outcomes of 26 COP and what are the commitments which have been made by India in the conference. All right. Again, if you are keeping in touch with the newspaper in last 3-4 months, you will be easily able to answer this question. And the last question from the environment section was about landslides and important components of national landslide risk management strategy. I took this question yesterday for all of those who were present in the yesterday's session. We discussed this question along with the landslide question on the GS paper 1, where we talked about why this question was asked, because we know that in the month of September and October, there were a series of landslides, both in Himalayas as well as in Western Ghats. And so this was really a question coming from the current affairs. So if we look into the distribution of current affairs and static, there is only one question which does not have any correlation with the current affairs, but rest of the 4 questions have been asked by UPSC because they were the major headlines of the environment section or the climate section or the climate change. Are we clear on all of the points which I've made so far? So, and not just the year 2021. If we look into the question paper of 17, 18, 19, 25 years, as far as GS paper 3 is concerned, most of the questions are asked if those topics have been in news in preceding 1.5 years. So for example, last year, the question was asked on environment impact assessment. And that was asked because the government came up with a draft notification changing the EIA notification of the 2006. All right. So we are going to take up, as we have done yesterday and today by Baswa sir, we will take up one question and try to understand how we could have answered that question. So this question is, describe the major outcomes of the 26th session of the COP to UNFCCC. What are the commitments made by India in this conference? So this question was of 15 marks and it needed to be answered in 250 words. And if you map the syllabus, it directly maps to the conservation, environmental pollution, and degradation. So basically everything related to climate. Okay, so this is the question. And as we have discussed yesterday also, the first part of writing an answer is to decode the main demand of the question correctly, right? So when it comes to decoding of the main demand of the question, this is a very straightforward question. It starts with describe the major outcomes. So let's, for the time being, leave the introduction. Let's talk about the body part, right? When it comes to the body part, your body part should first clearly describe the major outcomes, right? Where you will talk about what steps or what were the final outcomes of the COP26 dealing with adaptation, mitigation, phase down, phase out of fossil fuels. And then the second part of the question, the main demand of the question, is what are the commitments made by India? So that has to be separately highlighted in your answer. That cannot go as a part or a sub part of the first demand. And so the commitments made by India, right? And then finally, you will end the answer with a conclusion. All right, is this point clear to everyone? And so in our mains answer writing session and mains revision classes and current affairs classes, whenever we solve the mains question, right, the first thing we do is decoding of the question. Because what it does is that it helps you identify the introduction. Because introduction is the first thing which you are going to write in an answer, right? So in this case, when the question is about 26th session of Conference of Parties of UNFCCC, you can either directly describe the UNFCCC, what are the main objectives of UNFCCC. That is one thing. That is also a decent starting. But apart from that, you can also tell the examiner the importance of Glasgow Summit or the COP26. You see, since the finalization of the Paris climate deal, it has been more than 5 years. And the Article 6 to the Paris climate deal, which is about the rule book of the carbon market, is still not final until we had the Glasgow Summit. And before that, all the conferences were all about finalization of the Article 6, which talks about market and non-market mechanisms, right? We have discussed all these things. So either you could have directly described UNFCCC, or you could have talked about the expectations from this particular summit. Because then if you write about how important the anticipations, how high the anticipations were as far as Glasgow Summit is concerned, and then when you describe the outcomes in the body part, it will justify whether the expectations which the global community had from UNFCCC's 26 COP were justified or not. And then in the conclusion, you can finally say that whether the Glasgow Summit was able to fulfill the expectation or not. Is this point clear? So if I lay the outline, what you are going to do is the expectation, then actual outcome, and whether those expectations were met or not. Is this point clear? And as a way forward, you can suggest that these are the things which the global community should adopt, should do in order to meet the challenge of the climate change. Is this point clear to everyone? Okay. So now we will take up the intro part. So as I already highlighted, the 26 parties on the climate change was held in Glasgow with the goal of finalizing the rules and processes for implementing the Paris Agreement and convincing all nations to commit to a net zero objective by a certain year. Fair enough. These were the only two expectations because of which all the nations decided to meet at Glasgow. And that is why Glasgow, after even, especially after the disaster of Madrid, the nations were very excited, especially the developed nations, because they thought that first they could get countries like India and China to agree to net zero emission year, which is less than 2050. And developing countries were very excited because they thought that developed countries would agree to a common set of rules on which the carbon market is going to work. All right. And so once you have laid out the expectation, the question actually demands you to write the major outcomes of the conference of the parties. So we have discussed in the mains revision classes, we have discussed in current affairs classes that it is necessary that you take keywords directly from the question, because if you do not put headings as the keywords taken from the question, the examiner would never know where you have addressed the main demand of the question. So if the question says describe the major outcomes, you have to use major outcomes of COP. If the question demands from you the commitments made by India, the heading has to be commitments made by India. All right, is this point clear? Okay, so we know that there are two major components when it comes to the climate change. One is adaptation, another one is mitigation, right? Is this, all of us understand what is mitigation and adaptation, right? I've discussed it multiple times. So mitigation is all about reducing the amount of greenhouse gases being released into the atmosphere. Adaptation is realizing that a lot of greenhouse gases have already been released into the atmosphere in last 150 years. Climate change has already taken place. And so you have to change the processes of production. You have to change your own lifestyle to suit to the changed realities. Because climate change is not going to be reversed in next 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. It will take at least 100 years for the actions we are taking to bear fruit. And so what until then? And so you have to reform the way you are doing agriculture. You have to change the way you are doing industrial production. And so the two major components, the important fact of COP26 was that in both of them, important agreements were finalized. So starting with mitigation, so phase down of coal was finalized. Strengthening of the nationally determined contribution was finalized, was agreed upon, which is also basis of Paris Climate Deal. Remember, we discussed that Paris Climate Deal is about binding obligation only as far as those are internally nationally determined contributions. And so it did not fail like Kyoto, because Kyoto was a top-down approach, whereas Paris Climate Deal is a bottom-up approach. You willingly commit yourself to a goal that can be even a minuscule amount. You commit to that, but then that becomes binding. And only condition is that every 5 years you have to increase the commitment. And so the countries have agreed to increase their commitments. And apart from the UNFCCC meet, the ministers of environment of every country are going to meet. Apart from that also, apart from the head of the governments, the ministers accountable for environment, forest and climate change in their own respective countries are going to meet to talk about the mitigation efforts, to submit their efforts and talk about what they're doing in their own countries. Adaptation is something which has been neglected for a very long time, right? So developed countries have agreed sort of to at least double the amount of money allocated to the adaptation effort. And just like nationally determined contributions are completely focused on mitigation efforts, and that is why we can judge mitigation efforts because we have numbers over there. So when India says that it is going to increase the energy efficiency by 30% by 2025, we can measure the performance of India as far as mitigation is concerned. But since the countries did not agree to any kind of goal or numbers as far as adaptation efforts are concerned, we do not have any scale on which we can judge the performance of the countries. And so that is why the countries have agreed to work on a plan through which they are going to come up with the adaptation goals as well. All right. Financing has been a long issue between a cause of concern for developing countries, because in 2009 in Cancun, the developed countries promised to come up with $100 billion fund to transfer technology, which they did not agree in Madrid, but in Glasgow, they have agreed to provide $100 billion starting 2025. Then a methane pledge was also finalized, because we know that methane is a greenhouse gas just like carbon dioxide. It has much higher global warming potential than carbon dioxide. The only benefit is that the amounts released by the human activity is much less. And also the residence time of methane is much less. So that is why it is never the main cause of, it is never the main focus. Main focus is always on the greenhouse gas, the major greenhouse gas, which is carbon dioxide. The second part of the question was India's commitment at COP26. And so we know that India did not budge under the pressure of the developed countries of coming up with net zero emission by 2050. And so instead of 2050, just for the sake of committing something, India committed to 2070, because we have to depend upon emissions to develop ourselves, because climate change is not our primary concern. It is a big concern for us, but the primary concern for our country is to give employment to people, bring them out of poverty, to be able to bring them out of the poverty. We need to emit coal. Not only 55% of the power production in our country is dependent on coal, right? We all know that. All of us know this fact very well. So for these reasons, India did not commit itself to phase out of the coal. And as far as net zero emission is concerned, India committed to net zero by 2070. Then India launched e-Amrit, which is about creating awareness as far as e-vehicles are concerned. And India increased, just like the last time, India increased its NDCs. And so these two commitments of fulfilling 50% of its energy requirement by renewable energy, instead of 2020, 2040, India is going to achieve it by 2030, and India will reduce 1 billion tons of carbon emission by 2030. So these are the commitment which India made right at the Glasgow. All right. So these were the two portions of the body part. When it comes to the conclusion, we discussed that now, setting the tone in the introduction about the expectation, then actually what had happened in the Glasgow. And now, despite the fact that COP26 highlighted numerous victories in the fight against climate change, the goals set are insufficient to prevent Earth's temperature from rising by 1.5 degrees by the end of century. This is the data which was given by the IPCC, that if we continue releasing the greenhouse gases at the current rate, the temperature rise will be at least 3 to 4 degrees Celsius. If we take into account the actions committed by all the countries, it will be less than 3 to 4 degrees, but still it will not be sufficient to contain the global rise beneath or less than 1.5 degrees Celsius. And so, even though the countries have committed enhanced action, even though the countries have committed more than they committed in the Paris climate deal, but then if you accumulate, if you account for all of these commitments, then also it's not going to be sufficient to contain the rise of the temperature within 1.5 degrees Celsius. And so as a result, the government should strive to enhance their aims and adopt more carbon neutral technology on a regular basis. So now, do you understand the flow of the answer? All right, is this point clear? So when it comes to the coverage, it was covered in the Compass magazine. It was discussed in the mains QIP classes. So all those points which I've discussed today have been discussed by me 2 months ago, where we just like today, we discussed about mitigation, adaptation, then financing, then carbon markets. All of these points were discussed. All other questions were also discussed. For example, this question on one world, one grid benefits. So when it comes to the resources, it becomes really, really easy to map these questions, when they directly come from the current affairs, which has been the trend in past 4 to 5 years, because we know that what are the news which are important, which can be asked by UPSC. So we make sure that we cover them in the Focus magazine, Compass magazine, and mains revision classes. Also, your foundation teachers cover them. So I guess it's time for me to give the mic to the Mangal sir. He's going to discuss the internal security, and all these 5 questions will be discussed by us in the upcoming series of videos. You already know about them. All right. Okay, so wait for 2 minutes while we hand over the stage to Mangal sir.
Hello everyone, am I clearly audible and visible? Please write it down in the chat box if things are clear to you. Am I audible? Yes, no? Okay, perfect. So now, after getting an idea about the General Studies Paper 3 from the point of view of economics, environment and disaster management, we are here to discuss the questions related to internal security. Now, as Baswa sir has already highlighted that the weightage of internal security has hovered around 40 to 50 marks in the General Studies Paper 3. Similarly, continuing with the trend, UPSC had asked questions worth 50 marks, where we had 2 10 markers and 2 15 marker questions in the internal security part. Again, as we have been highlighting regularly that how you approach a subject. So the 2 best tools that we have are syllabus, and second tool is of course the previous year questions. And as far as the nature of internal security is concerned, it is not much current affairs oriented, although sometimes some current affairs related questions are asked, but mainly it has a more static portion to cover while you are preparing for the internal security part. In this line, if you look at the syllabus closely, the UPSC has clearly identified that these are the important things that you need to cover as far as internal security is concerned. In this line, the first topic is linkages between development and the spread of extremism, which is directly or indirectly related to Naxalism problem in India. Second is role of external state and non-state actors in creating challenges to internal security, which is basically terrorism related issue. In this, we all are aware that Pakistan sponsors state-sponsored terrorism in the Jammu and Kashmir region. Then the next part is challenges to internal security through communication networks, role of media and social networking sites in internal security challenges. Then we have basics of cyber security, money laundering and its prevention. Then security challenges and their management in border areas. So border area management is another theme. And lastly, we have various security forces, agencies, their mandate and structure. Now, if you divide this syllabus into key themes on which the questions are asked, this will come out to be something like this. First is of course the Naxalism. Second is terrorism. Third is drug trade, human trafficking, fake currency, or you can say the organized crime and the challenges it poses to internal security. Then border management, cyber security, threats from social networking, money laundering, and any legislation that is related to security. For example, a question was asked related to UAPA in 2019 or 20. And again, you can expect questions on these laws related to internal security. For example, Armed Force Special Powers Act has been in news in the past 2 months because of the incident that happened in Nagaland. So you can expect a question on it if it keeps into current affairs in the next year's mains examination. So these are the broad themes that you need to prepare. Now, how do you prepare these themes and what are the aspects that you need to cover? So in this line, if you look at the previous year questions properly of last 6 to 7 years, you will yourself understand that, okay, these are the parts that needs to be prepared properly to answer the questions if any is asked from any of these topics. So let us look at how the questions have been asked from different themes. So first is of course the linkages between development and extremism, which we are all aware is related to Naxalism. So if you look at the key aspects on which the question related to this has been asked, first is of course what are the determinants of left-wing extremism. Second is what is the government's approach, And this has largely been the theme of all the questions that have been asked in the previous years related to Naxalism, be it 2015, 2018 or 2020. So if you are able to correlate the linkage between development and the extremism in the Naxal areas, and if you have already prepared the government strategy and how you need to handle these challenges, you will be able to answer any question related to left-wing extremism that is asked in the mains examination. Then if you look at the next part, we have cybersecurity, which has been one of the important themes. This year also a question was asked from this particular theme, and regularly we have been asked question. In this, first is of course, what are the different types of cybersecurity attacks? Second is India's preparedness, and third is what India needs to do further in order to strengthen its cybersecurity apparatus. If you prepare these three parts, you will be able to answer the questions in the cybersecurity part also. Then let's look at the next part, which is related to border management or border related issues. In this, we need to prepare the challenges that India faces along all the borders, be it Myanmar border, be it Nepal border or Pakistan border. So in this line, if you prepare this well, then again, you need to focus on the mandate of various agencies that are handling these border situation in India along all these borders, which are vulnerable to India's internal security. The next part is of course terrorism. Questions have regularly been asked. If you look at the different dimensions of the question, first you need to analyze what is the kind of threat that is posed by terrorism to India's internal security. Second is what are the causes. Then we have the next theme of terror financing, and all these aspects plus what needs to be done has been asked regularly by the UPSC. For example, this question that was asked in 2019 is similar to the question that has been asked this year. In this, UPSC required us to answer that the scourge of terrorism is a grave challenge to national security. What solutions do you suggest to curb this growing menace? What are the sources of terror funding? So it had three dimensions. What exactly is terrorism? What are the challenges it poses? What are the solutions? And finally, what are the major sources of terror financing? So these are 3-4 dimensions of terrorism. If you handle them properly, you would be able to answer the question if any is asked related to terrorism. Then besides this, we have questions that have been asked related to social media and the threat it poses to internal security. You can see these questions that are on your screen right now. Plus money laundering is also one theme, and questions have been asked on money laundering. This year also we had a question on the money laundering part. Now if you look at this year's question papers, this year's question paper of internal security, and if you look at these questions, these were the broad themes that were touched by UPSC. First is money laundering. Second is your cyber security. Third is external and non-state actors. And fourth is terrorism. So what was our approach in the mains revision classes was that we broke these different subjects based on the understanding of the previous year questions into different parts and made individual questions on all these parts. And if anybody had prepared these aspects, they could have easily answered all the questions that you see on the screen, because most of the times if you see these questions, these have been inspired from the previous year questions only. If you look at this first question, it is discuss how emerging technologies and globalization contribute to money laundering. Elaborate the measures to tackle the problem of money laundering, both at national and international level. Then if you look at this question, it was asked in 2015 by UPSC. It is a similar question. Money laundering poses a serious security threat to a country's economic sovereignty. What is its significance? What are the steps taken? So this part remains the same. Then look at this question related to cyber security. It reads, keeping in view India's internal security, analyze the impact of cross-border cyber attacks. Also discuss the defensive measures against these sophisticated attacks. Look at this question that has been asked in the 2019. Discuss different types of cyber crimes. It was asked in 2020. Discuss the different types of cyber crimes and measures required to be taken to fight the menace. So again, preparedness of India against cyber security attacks becomes an important theme. If you have prepared it properly, you could have answered this particular aspect that has been asked related to cyber security. Then look at this question, analyze the multidimensional challenges posed by external state and non-state actors to the internal security of India. Also discuss measures required to be taken to combat these threats. Now, this is directly or indirectly related to the issue of terrorism, because one of the important external state actor which is creating disturbances in India's internal security is of course Pakistan, plus there are other state actors as well, plus the non-state actors like the terrorist organizations or the organized crimes which have linkages with the terrorist organizations, they are posing a threat to the India's internal security. So these are two broad dimensions. So the question of our interest in this discussion is this, which is analyze the complexity and intensity of terrorism, its causes, linkages, and obnoxious nexus. Also suggest the measures required to be taken to eradicate the menace of terrorism. This has been inspired from this question that has been asked in the previous years, which is, the scourge of terrorism is a grave challenge to national security. What solutions do you suggest to curb this growing menace? What are the major sources of terrorist financing? Okay, then let us look at how we covered different dimensions of terrorism in the mains revision classes, and that will help us in understanding what you could have used or which all points you could have used in writing an answer appropriately for this particular question related to terrorism that has been asked. So this is our question which we'll be handling now. Now, if you look at the discussion that we had during the mains revision classes, we divided the issue of terrorism into different questions. And one such question is, terrorism as a threat to national security arises from external state actors and external non-state actors, as well as ideology-oriented terrorism. Elucidate. So isn't it related to the question that has been asked this year? What are the challenges posed by external state actors, non-state actors, as well as, you can say, ideology-oriented terrorism, which is here, okay? So this was one question that we did. In this, we already prepared a basic definition of terrorism. What exactly is meant by terrorism? If you look at terrorism, it refers to the systematic use of violence to create a general climate of fear in population and in order to bring about a particular political objective. So this was the basic definition that you could have prepared, and you could have used this particular definition in the introduction part of this question. Then in the second, another question that we discussed in this particular part was, terrorism is a grave threat to national security. What solutions do you suggest? In this part, because it is a grave threat, we talked about the complexity and the intensity of terrorism in this particular introduction, which was, terrorism threatens the national security. How? By destabilizing economy, by breaking the political cohesion, and threatening the legitimacy and the efficacy of the state itself. So this clearly highlights that it's a complex problem because it poses different challenges to the economy. It can lead to breaking up of political cohesion. It can question the legitimacy of the state itself. Okay. Then the next part, if you look at this particular thing, another complexity related to terrorism is that there is no international consensus on what exactly constitutes terrorism or what exactly is the definition of terrorism. That is why this question was discussed from this particular perspective, because there is lack of any particular international consensus on the definition of the terrorism. And that is why India has been pitching that the UN Convention or UN Comprehensive Convention on Terrorism should be finalized immediately so that we have a clear consensus regarding the issue of terrorism. Then looking at the causes part of this, the causes of terrorism. First, of course, is the external state actors, where we are mentioning that the other external state actors are supporting the non-state actors in destabilizing our country. A prime example of this is Pakistan, which has the ultimate aim of integrating Jammu and Kashmir into Pakistan. So this is first cause. Second cause, if you look at the discussion that we had, it was related to terrorism by non-state actors, which include the threat posed by ISIS, Al-Qaeda, or different non-state actors. Then the other challenge that is posed, or the causes of terrorism, is of course ideology-oriented terrorism that India faces in the form of left-wing extremism, right-wing terrorism, or you can say religious terrorism, as well as ethno-national terrorism, which we see in the northeastern parts of India. So this is again another cause. What can be another cause? It is the radicalization that exists in our society. This can be because of push factors as well as pull factors. What can be the push factors? It can be alienation of the people from the political consensus that exists in our country. So people who are politically alienated, who are socially and economically vulnerable, they can be pushed into the garb of radicalization, and from there on, they become vulnerable to be recruited by the terrorist organization. Okay, so this is another factor, that is radicalization can lead to, or it is one of the causes of terrorism. Then social media has been playing a key role in recruitment of terrorists. In this line, ISIS is infamous for recruitment of terrorists by the use of social media. So we discussed this particular part also in the discussion in the mains revision classes. Then if you look at Another factor or cause, it is of course the terror financing, which needs to be handled. Now the challenge in this question or writing this question was that you had to squeeze all these points into 250 words, because if you had a broader understanding of all these aspects, you could have easily created an answer structure which meets the requirement of this particular question. Then as we talked about the sources of financing, the second part of the question is linkages and the obnoxious nexus. So in this line, we all are aware that terrorism has linkages with organized crime, because India's location or geography is such where we are surrounded by two of the important drug centers in the neighborhood. One is the Golden Crescent, which is in the Afghanistan and Iran, and then there is Golden Triangle, which is in the Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar region. So because of the complex geography or the unique location, we are vulnerable, and these are the locations which breed the organized crime and which has linkage with the terrorism. That is how we draw linkages between organized crime and terrorism. So look at this. If there exists terrorism and if there exists organized crime, it can generate the illegal money, which can be money laundered and which can lead to terror financing and in turn breed terrorism. So this is a vicious cycle that is created because of the existence of organized crime and terrorism in our country. So this clearly demonstrates the linkage between terrorism and the organized crime that exists in our society or in India's neighborhood, which poses a challenge to the internal security. Then again, a linkage can be drawn because of the geography of India. Okay, so look at the geography of India. We have the Golden Crescent on this part and we have the Golden Triangle on the eastern part, and both these make India vulnerable to the challenge of terrorism, because there is a nexus between the organized crime and terrorism because of its unique geography. Then, so this is what we discuss here. Next thing that we need to understand is how are we going to tackle, which is the last part of our question, that is what are the measures that India needs to take in order to eradicate the menace of terrorism. So if you look at the discussions that we had related to the solutions, first and foremost was strengthening the security architecture, which had different points like improving the intelligence gathering, training of the armed forces, mock drills, security intelligence should be secured, or counter-terrorism operations should be conducted. All these things were incorporated in strengthening the security architecture. This is one aspect of solving the issue of terrorism. Then there is another aspect which needs to be handled, which is the terror financing. That is also part of the solution. If you handle terrorist financing, you will in turn squeeze the space that is available for terrorists to operate, because they also need finance to operate. That is why second solution would be reducing the terror financing. For that, different measures are there. That is, we need to strengthen the Prevention of Money Laundering Act. Plus, we need to have international collaboration in the form of FATF or all the bodies that exist related to money laundering. Then in this part, we also need to analyze that why is India vulnerable to money laundering? So India is vulnerable to money laundering because we have a huge chunk of informal economy which can be utilized by the terror organizations for its financing. So that is also one suggestion that we can give here. Plus, besides the strengthening of the security architecture, handling the financing of the terrorist organization, the most important part is tackling the underlying problems or the underlying issues which in turn breed terrorism in India. And these of course are socio-economic development, creating a political consensus, because this has been the root cause of terrorism in Jammu and Kashmir. Then you look at the good governance, because that will make it bring the people who are in the business of terrorism into the mainstream of India. Plus, sometimes the security agencies are not respecting the rule of law, and this has been seen in the case of the incident that happened in Nagaland, and that in turn breeds alienation of the population of India to get into the hands of terrorist organizations. Then another tool that is used by the terrorist organizations is propaganda. That is why the underlying cause is the propaganda that is created by the terrorist organization. So if India is able to effectively counter this propaganda, we will be able to handle the issue of terrorism. So these are the multi-dimensional things that we need to focus or provide in the solutions in order to answer the measures that are required to handle the terrorism. Plus, last but not the least, we need to focus on providing appropriate legal measures, because the existing laws have been seen to be not that effective in handling the issue of terrorism. That is why government has already created the UAPA law. It keeps on amending it, and that is why we say that we need more stringent and specific laws to handle the issue of terrorism, right? So these are the things that were discussed in the class in the form of different questions and different dimensions of terrorism, as you have seen on your screen. This brings us to what can be the answer structure for this question. As I already highlighted in the last class related to international relations, answer writing is all about breaking the question into subparts and addressing all the parts of the question properly so that it becomes easy for the examiner to understand what are you writing in the examination. So if you look at this question, first is of course in the introduction part you can write that. In the body part what you can write is complexity, intensity and causes. Then we need to create linkages between organized crime and terrorism. And finally, measures will be half part of our answer. That is, we need to focus on strengthening security. We need to improve curbs on terror financing. We need global collaboration. And finally, we need to tackle the underlying causes of terrorism. All these we discussed in our classes in the form of different questions related to terrorism, because at times specific question can be asked related to terror financing. That is why it needed to be handled in more depth. But this question is a more broad-based question. That is why you had to incorporate points from these understandings that we developed during our classes. And lastly, we need to highlight that there is no one-stop solution to handle terrorism. That is why we need a multi-pronged strategy which focuses on all these aspects. Right? So let us look at a model introduction for this question. So what we discussed in the class related to the complexity of the issue of terrorism, you could have highlighted that terrorism threatens the national security by destabilizing the economy, breaking political cohesion, and threatening the legitimacy and effectiveness or efficacy of the state itself. This could have been a simple introduction to this question. Second part is, of course, we need to highlight on the complexity, intensity and its causes collectively. That way we can handle or we can reduce the number of words that we have to write, because we have to write this answer into limited words, that is 250 words. If we divide it into 3 parts, that will make our answer more lengthy and time consuming. And by writing this, that due to the following causes, the complexity and intensity has been increasing. We have integrated all these 3 parts into one. First is, of course, there is lack of international sense. I've already highlighted that there is no international definition or convention related to terrorism, although all the countries in the world are facing this issue of terrorism. Second is, what is the second cause which is leading to complexity and intensity? Terrorism is not just homegrown, it is being supported by external state actors, that is state-sponsored terrorism by Pakistan. Then we have non-state actors. Which are these? These are the terrorist organizations like LET, ISIS or Al-Qaeda, which are at times supported by these state actors to fulfill their political goals. Next is, if a society is polarized and is radicalized, this society becomes vulnerable to the issue of terrorism. That we have seen already in case of some of the Middle Eastern countries like Syria, Iraq. All these things are already happening, which became the epicenter of the ISIS. Okay, that is why the next important cause which is making the problem complex and is increasing the intensity is polarization and radicalization based on different ideologies, including left-wing, right-wing, ethno-nationalism, as well as religious extremism. Next important thing is political alienation and social vulnerability, which is the root cause of terrorism that we see in the case of Jammu and Kashmir, because Jammu and Kashmir is a political problem that is happening since India got independence and Jammu and Kashmir was integrated, right? So it is seen that political alienation is one of the causes of terrorism in Jammu and Kashmir. Then another important cause is terrorist propaganda, where the terrorist organizations use social media to create a propaganda and recruit more number of terrorists. And a prime example is ISIS. So we keep on supporting the arguments in favor of causes by using some of these examples. Then another cause is, of course, the terror financing. As we have learned, it is integrated with the organized crimes like the drug trade, drug trafficking, human trafficking, all these aspects. Then, of course, there has been increasing role of Pakistan. The Taliban's presence in Afghanistan makes it more vulnerable, and the presence of terrorist groups in Jammu and Kashmir makes India vulnerable to the issue of terrorism. These are the causes, and the complexity and intensity has been increasing because of these causes. What would be the next part of the answer? Next part would, of course, be, we'll be drawing the geographical linkage between India's location. So you can draw a diagram here. You can draw that India is vulnerable to the problem of terrorism because it is linked with the organized crime because of the presence of Golden Crescent and Golden Triangle in India's vicinity. Next part will be to create the linkages and nexus between terrorism and organized crime. In this, you can highlight this report which we discussed in the class, that UN International Narcotics Control Board in its report highlighted the nexus between organized crime and terrorism. And this is how you can relate the terrorism with the organized crime, and you could have drawn a diagram in order to reduce the number of words. That is how you increase the number of dimensions that you write in your answers. Okay. Otherwise, if you had gone on to expand all these points, you would have crossed the word limit and it would have costed you time in the examination. So that is how you use effectively the diagrams. We already discussed this diagram in the classes that were held in the mains revision classes. Next part, of course, is measures that are required. So in the first part, we analyze causes, complexity and intensity of the terrorism. In the second part, we created the linkages and the obnoxious nexus that exists between organized crime and terrorism. And in the last part, or the second half of the question, we will handle the issues. We will write about the measures that are required to control the issue of terrorism. In this, first is, of course, strengthening the security architecture. What we discussed in detail in the mains revision classes had to be squeezed into the word limit by writing and highlighting the key words that we used in the discussion. For example, in intelligence gathering, there has to be intelligence gathering right from the ground level. It has to be collated well, and it needs to have an easy access for the security agencies. And in this line, we already created the NAD grid, which is one of the examples that we can use. Then, of course, we need to strengthen our armed forces which are handling the issue of terrorism. In this, what we'll do, we'll improve their training. And for this, already the government of India has created counter-insurgency and anti-terrorist schools, or the CIATs. Next thing is, we need to be already prepared and create scenarios of what kind of challenges can we face if any terrorist attack happens. Because if you are aware, when the terrorist attack happened in Mumbai, the government of India the security agencies were not that prepared, because it was an unconventional threat, because normally the terrorist attacks used to happen in Jammu and Kashmir only. Okay. So that is why we need to prepare well through mock drills, counter-terrorist operations, and in order to improve the efficacy, we need to create standard operating procedures for the armed forces that they need to follow while handling any kind of terrorist attack that India faces. Then we need to focus on securing key installations, because key installations like attacks have happened in Uri and Pathankot on armed forces. These are the key areas. We also need to focus on securing the government installations, or like the nuclear installations. That is why securing key installation will be a part of strengthening the security architecture to handle the issue of terrorism. What next? Speedy and effective investigation. If any terrorist attack happens, if we are able to arrest some of the terrorists, there is a need for speedy investigation into this, proper prosecution and conviction of these terrorists, so that they create a deterrence against the terrorism, right? So that people are not falling for the terrorist propaganda. Okay. So this is part of criminal justice system. That is also part of the security measures. Then what you do is, in next part, what we need to do is, we need to handle the terror financing. That is one of the issue or one of the cause of terrorism. What we will write here? We will, of course, strengthen the existing law, which is the Prevention of Money Laundering Act 2002, which has also been amended recently. So you need to strengthen this law. Plus, which all agencies are working for curbing the money laundering? We need to focus on empowering these agencies. These are ED, that is Enforcement Directorate, Financial Intelligence Unit, or the National Investigation Agency. Then, of course, black money is one problem, or informal economy leads to money laundering, plus it is one of the factors which is helping the terror financing. That is why what we'll do, we'll formalize or focus on formalizing economy more and more. That is why we need more financial inclusion and formal economy in India. Plus, of course, we need to improve the cyber security, and we need regulation on cryptocurrency, etc., because these are the routes that are being taken by the terrorist organizations these days. Plus, beyond these, we need global collaboration, because we already saw there is lack of definition of terrorism. We need to focus on finalizing the UNCCIT, for which India has been pitching at the UN to early completion and finalization of this UN Convention on International Terrorism. Plus, we need to focus or improve the effectiveness of the bodies that are handling the issue of money laundering, like Financial Action Task Force, or the Eurasian Group, or the IMF's money laundering body, plus UN Office on Drugs and Crime. All these need to be strengthened more. This can be one of the suggestions or one of the measures for handling the issue of terrorism, because if we do not have any international consensus, we will not be able to create or sideline the countries or the state actors which are supporting these terrorist organizations, right? Next part. After understanding that, we have strengthened the security architecture. If we strengthen if we create an international collaboration and consensus, and we tackle the issue of terror financing, we need to tackle the underlying challenges. We've already discussed them in the classes. So for this, we need to engage citizens, civil society and media in this fight against terrorism. Plus, education can be one of the tools to make the society more harmonious and cohesive in the long run, so that the youth is not attracted to these religious propaganda or indoctrination by these terrorist organizations. And in this line, we can create this virtual cycle where we create socio-economic development. Socio-economic development is important, which needs to be aligned with creating a political consensus, because this has been one of the issues in Jammu and Kashmir, where a political consensus is not yet final. Plus, focus has to be on good governance. The security agencies need to respect the rule of law, and we also need to focus on countering the terror propaganda by the terrorist organizations, by the government of India itself. Plus, we need special anti-terror laws. That is how we have mentioned different dimensions and still not crossed the word limit. Look at the number of dimensions that we have touched. I have tried to write this sample answer in the word limit. This is for around 280 words. Okay. Next part, of course, is conclusion, where we have handled all the issues, causes, linkages, and finally the measures. We can say that a multi-pronged approach is required, which focuses on strengthening security architecture along with countering the underlying challenges that breed the issue of terrorism. Right? So that is how we see, we break the topic in the internal security into different parts. For example, the issue of terrorism was dealt with from different dimensions in the class, and all these dimensions could have come handy, or they might have come handy for you to write this broader question that UPSC has asked this time. It was not a very specific question. You needed to write all the different aspects related to terrorism into this one question in 250 words. That was the biggest challenge for everyone. Okay, and that is how you do this exercise. Okay, how we covered these topics in the classes, how you could have used these points in writing this particular answer. From now here on, I'll hand over the class to Faizan, and we'll be discussing the remaining questions in the form of the videos which will be uploaded, where we'll be analyzing all these questions and how we covered and how you could have answered, or what could have been a proper sample answer to write these questions that were asked related to internal security. Thank you so much. I'll hand over to Faizan now.
You see on the screen Science and Technology Mains 2021 discussion. Am I audible to all of you? We'll do the discussion of Science and Technology and the ethics paper in succession. So we'll quickly finish off Science and Technology discussion, and then we'll take up the discussion of GS paper 4. There were 3 questions in this year mains paper from Science and Technology. One of the questions was on S-400. S-400 has been making news for quite some time. India has procured, against the pressure of US, S-400, which is a missile defense system from Russia. S-400 largely was covered in the newspaper from the context of internal security, from the context of international relation. But this question has been asked in the paper from Science and Technology section, because they have been asked to discuss technology rather than the international relation implication or the importance or the significance of the missile defense system for India. The question was, how is S-400 air defense system technically superior to other defense systems that are available in the world? So in this sense, it was a little surprise, because when you do define missile defense system, you do not do the details of the parameters. For example, it is superior in a sense that it is a long-range surface-to-air missile and missile defense system. It can have multiple targets, around 36 at a time. Although it is anti-ballistic missiles defense system, but still it can target UAVs as well. It has better advanced radar features, and all of these are at only a fractional cost of the missile defense system of the West. For example, that of US, THAAD. THAAD was asked in the prelims exam of 2018. These missile defense systems, UPSC has been asking. UPSC also has asked about the Iron Dome defense system that is used by Israel, or other defense system maybe of US like Patriot. But the ranges, what is the range? Do you know the range of S400? Do you know the altitude at which it flies? Do you know the details of the radar system that it has? Do you know how many targets it can hit simultaneously? Do you know it can also hit the target beyond the horizon? So those technical parameters you might not be knowing, that you cannot quantify it. But qualitatively, you have to discuss those parameters. And those parameters, the qualitative parameters, like it is surface to air, long range missile defense system. Those parameters were discussed umpteen number of times in the DNS that we take every day. So qualitatively, you could have handled this question easily because it was a common topic, although UPSC does this surprise, and you must have seen this in GS paper 1 and other papers as well. UPSC picks up a topic from current affair, but the context in which that was discussed largely, that is changed. And this is done in prelims, this is done in mains as well. Largely, it was discussed in the context of international relation, internal security. But UPSC has asked that technological aspect of it. So be sure that a topic that is very important, which is very prominent in the current affair, you have to do it from multiple aspects. For example, cryptocurrency in society. You might not have expected that, but UPSC has done it. So topics which become very important, very like cryptocurrency, newspaper flooded with articles of cryptocurrency. So you understand which topic is important. Do not think that the context in which the topic is appearing in the paper, UPSC will ask in the same context. The context can be changed. So multiple aspects of that topic you have to know. This is the basic about UPSC. Other question of science and technology was on LED. Question on LED has been long pending. UPSC asked a question that Nobel Prize in Physics of 2014 was jointly awarded to 3 people for inventing blue LED in 1990s. This is the context. How has this invention impacted the everyday life of human beings? Now, first of all, you have to understand, as we have discussed multiple times in the classes, that the science and tech portion of your GS paper 3 is not exactly about technology. UPSC does not ask the technical details of topics. For example, the semiconductor, the PN junction, and other technical details of LED has not been asked here. It is mostly the application of technology, which is the syllabus, which is what you have to study regarding science and technology, as been shown here as well. Science, technology, and its application in everyday life is where your syllabus began from. And hence the question is, how has this invention impacted the everyday life of human beings? So this is not a surprise. And this question, we already predicted that it will come. In the QIP session, I have told you as to how to identify the important topics for science and tech for the mains exam. In that, I have identified a few topics for you. And LED was one of that. The reason is that although it has been recurring in the newspaper, in the prelims paper in the form of direct question, or sometimes UPSC often puts it in some of the options of the prelims question. In 2017, they have asked about organic light emitting diodes. And ever since, UPSC has been putting it in the options of other questions. In the prelims exam of 2021, UPSC has asked a direct question on LED. The question was comparing the sodium lamps and the LED lamps. So it was expected that a question on LED would come, and a question indeed came. So it's not a surprise. In the QIP session, we have discussed exactly what UPSC has asked. Nobel Prize in Physics in 2014. As you can see here in the lecture note, in the lecture, what we have been discussing, the same, exactly the same is the language of UPSC. The Nobel Prize in Physics of 2014 was jointly awarded to these people. It matched word for word. And we did discuss the answer to this question as well. And I'm going to take 5 minutes of time to discuss the answer writing strategy for this question in particular, and the question of science and technology in general. See, science and tech is in GS paper 3. And you know that you have to do syllabic integration. Meaning when you write about a topic, you also have to touch upon the other topics of the same GS paper, and if possible, the other topics of other GS papers. For example, when you're writing application of science and technology, one way is to go about writing the application as and when and whatever comes into your mind. But so you should look at the application of LED from the economic perspective. Then you have science and technology. So you have to look at the application of one technology in other technologies. Then in your syllabus, you have environment. So you should look at the application of LED in environment. Then you have other topics like disaster management, internal security. And if you have an application of technology in those areas, you should venture into those areas. Then you can look at other topics in other papers. That would be a method to generate points, and that will be a method to give proper structure to your answer. Let me show you what could be a plausible answer to this question. They say that Nobel Prize in Physics in 2014 was jointly awarded to 3 scientists for invention of blue LEDs in 1990s. But since they have made it clear that Nobel Prize is given, you can pick it from there, because you know that Nobel Prizes are given for those inventions, those scientific work that benefits mankind. So you can highlight this. So since Nobel Prize was given, so it ought to have benefit for mankind. You just have to illustrate and enumerate them. And you also, then you can give a little bit of briefing as to what is so special about blue LEDs. Red LEDs and green LEDs were known for a long time. The kind of semiconductors, the characteristic of it that depends upon the light that will be emitted from it. But you do not have to go into that detail. The benefit of LED, which is cheap, which is efficient, which is that it has long life, which is that its intensity can be changed very easily. Unlike the incandescent bulb, so just like you have regulators for fan, you change the speed, the intensity of lights can be changed very easily in case of LEDs. Otherwise, in case of sodium lamps, that cannot be done. So there are, and it is environmentally friendly as well, and it is cheap as well. So these benefits you cannot take because you cannot do much of the work in red light or green light. You cannot do reading, you cannot do cooking, you cannot do other stuff in red light or green light. For that, you needed white light. And white color from LED lamps was not possible unless you have all 3 colors ready: red, green, and blue. So the blue color was awaited for a long time. And it was waited that the benefit of LED will come to humanity once this is discovered. So it was a much awaited discovery. And when it was discovered, it brought huge benefit to mankind, and hence the Nobel Prize. So with this introduction, you can proceed ahead and give out the benefits. Now you can give out the benefits that comes to your mind, that's okay. But I'm telling you that your structure of the answer matters a lot. And to give a proper structure to your answer, you must have a methodology. Randomly, if you write points, that will never be structured. So to write this answer, I'm just showing you a sample. You can improve on this. You can come up with new ideas, make the structure better, improve the answer. But I'm telling you a very simplistic but a powerful method to write answer regarding application of any technology with proper structure. I'll begin with economy. In economy, you have energy sector that you have to study. Electricity is an important part of energy sector. So I have begun with electricity accessibility. With LED, it has been made possible that in remote areas using the solar panels, you can harness electricity using LEDs. That has made it more efficient and cheaper. And the LED lights can also be operated using low powered batteries that can be charged very easily through rooftop solar panels. Otherwise, if you use 100-watt bulbs or the sodium lamps, that is not possible to be run on low powered batteries. So harnessing electricity and its accessibility actually has improved with the invention of LED. It also has resulted in rural development or rural electrification for the same reason. LEDs help in energy conservation. It has long life, it is highly efficient, and because of these, the peak load demand in any area decreases because LED uses less energy. You understand, when the peak load demand of an area decreases, then there is a less load on infrastructure. Suppose, for example, in an area, the demand is of 10 raised to the power 4 megawatt. This is the peak load demand. Peak load demand is always very high, but ordinarily the electricity grid will be operating on a lesser load. So the ordinary demand is very less, but just that the system does not collapse. So you have to make it strong enough that it holds on to the peak load, and that increases the cost. And if the infrastructure cost increases, then the electricity cost for the consumer will also increase. So the peak load demand decreases because electricity utilization by LED is highly efficient. Then you can talk about this is regarding points from economy. You can think of other points yourself, but I'm just telling you a structure that you can follow to write the answer. Then from after economy, what section do you have? You have science and tech itself. Then whenever you write about a technology, you should look at application of that technology in the areas of other technologies. For example, LEDs find various applications, extremely high applications in other areas like communications, in the alarm system, in robotics, in the security system, in remote control operations, and organic LEDs. These are finding new applications in the touch screens and the electronic gadgets. So the new screens that we are looking at, which are much more smooth, much more efficient, and you can also use it on a bent surface like goggles, that wouldn't have been possible without invention of organic LEDs, advancement in this technology. So this is another thing, application of this technology in other technology, and the way it has helped in everyday life. Then from here, you can look at other areas like energy security. From security point of view, you can talk about energy security for the common man. You can also talk about the manufacturing units like MSMEs. They use electricity to be used more efficiently because they work at margin. The profitability of MSMEs are very thin. And so one policy of government from here and there, from GST, from increasing from 5% to 8% to 12%, it makes difference of heaven and earth. So these MSMEs who works on edges with thin margin, it's very important that efficient technologies come to them and they become more efficient. It's important for their survival. So then you can talk about environment. LEDs, unlike incandescent lamps, they do not release heavy metals into the environment like mercury and like lead and other metals like tungsten. They are safe. Although it doesn't have 0% pollution, it does have very slight amount of polluting elements as well. It does not cause 0% pollution to the environment, but it is considerably less. So it is environmentally friendly in that sense. As we have seen in the previous points, when the electricity demand decreases, then obviously you understand that in India, largely electricity is produced through thermal power plants. If you reduce the energy demand, the electricity demand, the greenhouse gas emission obviously will decrease. So it will help in mitigating climate change as well. This is one thing. There is another aspect of science and technology. Apart from knowing the applications, for common man, you also have to understand the schemes, the initiatives, the policies of Government of India in that area of research, in that area of technology. That is extremely important. You have to understand that the nature of mains exam is such that it's not just only about technology. It's about its application for common man, and it's also about the initiatives taken by the collaborative research done by public sector, private sector, and the prominent initiatives of Government of India or some state government in that. So it's not just technology. It's also society. It's also social justice. It's also economy. It's also disaster management. It's also internal security. It's also environment. It's also polity and governance. Remember that. That's the nature of science and technology section of GS paper 3, the mains for the UPSC mains exam. So you have to mention something that Government of India has come up to encourage the use of LED. For example, the Ujjwala program and the Street Light National program. These programs encourage use of LEDs in households and also for the purpose of street lighting. So somehow either in the body or in the conclusion, you have to chip that in. The evaluator would be looking for this. Where is this aspect of governance in your answer? It's very important. Okay. So this is how you have to go about first discussion. The other question was on applied biotechnology. What are the research and developmental achievements in applied biotechnology? Applied biotechnology simplistically means that has some industrial application. It is not just a theoretical research work. Applied biotechnology means the benefit of that through industry production will come to common man. That is what applied biotechnology is. How will these achievements help to uplift the poor section of society? See, this question also has the nature that generally UPSC has for science and technology, the application of technology. So you have to know the important upcoming technologies, researchers in biotechnology, and as to how it's going to help the common man. There are various areas of applied biotechnology, and it's not a single topic to be covered at once. You have to collect it, and this topic was gradually getting built up. And this topic had to be asked. And we discussed this in the QIP classes, and I told you that something on biotechnology had to come. Anyone could have guessed it. Because at the time of COVID-19 pandemic, because of new researches that going on in biotechnology, you must be knowing many things like RT-PCR test. You must have read about it. You know about the new coming vaccination. UPSC in the last prelims has asked about recombinant vaccines. UPSC also has asked about vaccine in general and other upcoming biotechnological researchers, like, for example, gene editing technologies. UPSC has asked. UPSC has asked previously about stem cell technology. UPSC has asked about assisted reproductive technologies, 3-parent babies. UPSC also has asked about other upcoming technologies. You must also have read intensively about mRNA technology, mRNA-based vaccine technology, which is a breakthrough in the area of vaccination. Similarly, DNA vaccines. So this is a topic that was gradually building up and was to be asked in the mains exam. It could have been anyone's guess. And different areas of applied biotechnology we did cover in our stretch-by-stretch basis, in our sectorially in our classes. For example, recombinant engineering we did, stem cell research we did, human genome project we did, gene editing methods like CRISPR. This also we did. Recombinant DNA we did. In the waste management, when we studied the waste management technologies, we also studied the application of biotechnology in waste management. That is also applied biotechnology. We also studied about disease diagnosis. Have studied intensively about RT-PCR test. This is the application of biotechnology for common man. Similarly, you have studied about mRNA-based vaccine. What could be a greater application of biotechnology other than vaccination that is helping each and everyone globally? People who do not have taken vaccine, it's helping them as well by stopping the pandemic. Then you have studied umpteen number of times. It has been going on for quite a few years, assisted reproductive technologies. UPSC in 2018 in the prelims exam has asked about 3D printed organs. It has asked the application of 3D printing, and one of the options was bionic ear. Bionic ears can also be produced through 3D printing. So 3D printed organs. And then you can think about other technologies as well. You can think 10, 20 more technologies apart from that has been mentioned here. But mind you, it's a 150-worded answer. It has to be. So you have to mention the important ones. So apart from mentioning technologies, you need to have one line each as to how it's going to uplift the poor section of society. This has been my focus ever since I've started teaching the science and tech. This is where the syllabus begins. It's the application of science and technology in everyday life. This is where your syllabus begins, and that's how you have to study the technologies and the science and tech portion from current affairs. That's how you have to deal with it. It's not a surprise. This question was to be asked. The other question on LED was to be asked because it was asked in prelims and for other reasons that I have told you. It was very much expected. Everyone knew it. Everyone who are aware as to how questions are asked, they knew it. But the S400, this was also covered as such. And if you have written mains, you must have read about this topic, and you must have had sufficient content to cover 150 words. And if you did not know the exact technical parameters, which is not expected as such, you should have done qualitative analysis as to what a missile defense system will do. And based on that, it is superior to other missile defense systems. So every year, UPSC asks 2 to 3 questions of science and tech questions are very critical for the reasons we have discussed in the class. So that's where we will end, and we'll have separately the nitty-gritty of answer writing. I've shown you the answer to the questions, but the greater detail and the nuances of answer writing we'll discuss, and we'll take the answer to these questions one by one in the series of videos that will follow from tomorrow or perhaps day after. That's where we end GS paper 3. In quick succession, we'll begin GS paper 4. So hold on, keep up with your energy. You're feeling dizzy, sleepy, then stretch up your arms, drink some water, take a deep breath, because we are going to start with GS paper 4 very shortly in a minute, and you have to be very, very attentive there.